Iya, betul. Oh iya, berita mau kopi.
Halo, selamat pagi. Halo.
Udah.
Selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi, Pak Sony.
Selamat pagi, selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi.
Kia ora.
How to say selamat pagi in what is that? Korea? David?
Kia ora. Kia ora
Kia
tatou.
ora.
Or something, yes.
Kia ora. Okay. Kia ora to everyone. Prof. Sony, I will be replacing Mushroom, our scheduled moderator today, because he get to have another task. But I'm very happy to be with you all today.
Oke, siap ya. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the second symposium of Social Science 2020 for Day 2. Before we begin, we are going to watch a video from our partner, from our committee as well. So before we begin this symposium, we're going to watch that video first, okay? Thank you. Thank you. Again, welcome back to the second symposium of Social Science 2020 for Day 2. My name is Gilang Manfauzi and I'm going to be your Master of Ceremony for today. We would like to extend our gratitude to our keynote speaker, all symposium speakers, moderators, and all participants who joined us yesterday. And welcome to the new participant who just joined the symposium for today. It is a biennial international event organized once in every 2 years by the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, or CESAS, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Yesterday, we learned a lot of things from keynote speaker and also symposium speakers, sharing their knowledge, research findings, their ideas, critiques based on the expertise of their field. The director of Center for Southeast Asian Studies, Professor Hamin, in her opening speech also launched the book as the publication of the first symposium we organized 2 years ago. And this is the book. It has the same title as our first symposium, Social Science in the Age of Transformation and Disruptions, Its Relevance, Role and Challenge. This book is an edited volume from 15 thinkers from many nationalities who participated in our first symposium on social science in 2018. So it was 2 years ago. So if you are interested to get this book, you can visit our website or you can contact the committee. And also for all participants who join this symposium will get 10% discount available for you for the pre-order of the book. So before we start our symposium 4, we would like to extend our gratitude as well to our partners who provide the support for organizing this symposium. We would like to extend our gratitude to the Faculty of Law, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Department of Sociology, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Department of Communication, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Gadjah Mada, the Center for Population Studies, Universitas Gadjah Mada, the Department Extension and Communication Study Program, the Graduate School of Universitas Gadjah Mada. Also, the Pacific Media Center, Te Amokura, Auckland University of Technology, New Zealand, Austrian Journal of Southeast Asian Studies, ASEAS, ICAT, the Indonesian Journal of Southeast Asian Studies, Integrated Coastal Zone Management, Universitas Diponegoro, Jurnal Masyarakat Budaya or Journal of Society and Culture of LIPI, last but not least, the Conversation Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, let us begin our symposium for today. So this is the 4th symposium, and we have 3 speakers who are going to talk about new ecological complexity. Here we have Professor David Roby from Auckland University of Technology, Mr. Sony Mumbunan, PhD from Universitas Indonesia, and also Ibu Linda Yanti Sulistiawati, SH, MSc, PhD from Universitas Gadjah Mada. And this session is moderated by Dr. Fisia Ita Yulianto. She's a sociocultural anthropologist. She gained her PhD from Freiburg University in Germany. And she is also the head of training, publication, and program division at the Center for Southeast Asian Social Studies, and also a lecturer at Master of Program of Performing and Visual Art Studies, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Dr. Ita, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Mas Gilang, for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. Very welcome to the second day of the symposium on social science today. My name is Fisia Ita Yulianto from the Center of Southeast Asian Social Studies, and this is my pleasant duty to be the moderator of this panel. Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday on the first day of the symposium, we had a wonderful keynote speaker and critical analysis on very many topics entangled to our undifferentiated social world today. One major highlight from yesterday's symposium was that there is a loud call from Professor Mahbubani, Kishore Mahbubani, our keynote speaker. There is a need, it is tangible, that there is a need for a new body of social science which are more inclusive for non-Western social scientists and social science theories. This morning, we are invited in this panel, we are invited to rethink about another pressing societal issues which have been long and have been highly neglected. That is about ecological problems. In this panel, we are also invited to redefine our relations with the environment. This panel is entitled New New Ecological Problems, Redefining Human Relations with the Environment. We will learn from three panelists. The first one is Professor David Robbie from UT, Auckland University of Technology, New Zealand. He is the director of the Pacific Media Center and a journalist for more than 40 years now. He is also the chief editor of Pacific Journalism Review, and he has been also reported on post-colonial coups, indigenous struggles for independence, and environmental and developmental issues. His presentation today is entitled Redefining New Ecological Problems, Post-Pandemic Climate Change and Oceania External Threats. Prof. Robbie, good morning.
Selamat pagi, Dr.
Selamat
Yulianto.
pagi. Very nice to see you again on the scene.
Great to see you as well, and great to see all the panel, and congratulations on the two-day symposium. I was able to see some of the sessions yesterday.
Great,
Yes.
great. Thank you for joining us. The second speaker is Dr. Sony Mumbunan. He's the lead economist at the World Resources Institute, WRI, Indonesia, and research scientist at the Research Center for Climate Change at the Universitas Indonesia. Dr. Sony holds an MSc in Empirical Economics and Policy Advice from Martin Luther University Halle-Wittenberg in Germany in 2008, and a PhD in Economics from University of Leipzig, Germany, based on his work at the Hamburg Center for Environmental Research in Germany. This time, he will share his view and analysis entitled Redefining Humanity and Nature Relations. Good morning, Dr. Sony. Nice to see you on the scene.
Good morning, Dr. Yulianto. Thanks for having me, and good morning to all panelists.
Thank you very much. The third speaker is Dr. Linda Yanti Sulistiawati. Good morning, Dr. Linda.
Morning,
All right. She's a senior research fellow at Asia Pacific Center for Environmental Law, National University of Singapore, and associate professor of law, Universitas Gadjah Mada. We will learn from her about the problem of COVID-19 and climate change. All right. So before we start with the presentation, let me briefly read some logistics for this panel. The presentation from the three speakers will be done in a row. And then for each, we will allocate 20 minutes. Afterward, we will continue with the question and answer. And participants are invited to write down their questions in the question and answer bullet, not in the chat room, by mentioning his or her name, the affiliations, and also to whom the question is addressed to. All right. Without further ado, I would like to welcome the first speaker, Prof. David Robbie, on the scene. Prof. Robbie, the 20 minutes ahead is yours.
Selamat pagi. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's an indigenous greeting from my country, Aotearoa, New Zealand. And as it's really a great pleasure to be invited to be part of this symposium, and particularly on this panel, which is very close to my heart, if you might say, as well as my reason. I've got from my presentation, I've got a slide presentation, and I'll get onto that in just a second. As our keynote speaker, Professor Mahbubani, expressed in his stimulating and challenging address yesterday, the world has fundamentally changed. The question is whether it has changed for a better future in the long run or worse. Hopefully, we are witnessing the end of neoliberalism as an economic recipe for the globe, and we'll be embarking on a new pathway based on social justice and collaboration, rather than a system based on growing inequality while 1%ers get richer and the rest of us struggle. So that just brief introduction, I would just switch to my presentation now. I'm just going to share the screen, correct? Right. So if nothing else, the COVID-19 pandemic has emphasized for us is the importance of acting collectively and cooperatively for the planet, but not just for our health, but also for the health of the world itself, and with a greater sense of urgency. The coronavirus pandemic has been widely described as a once-in-a-century catastrophe, but many scientists say that this is a naive way of looking at the crisis. According to a major study by 17 scientists on ecology and economics for pandemic prevention, recently published in Science Journal, 2 new zoonotic viruses a year have spilled from their wildlife hosts into humans over the past century. These scientists argue that it is essential to crack down on the international wildlife trade and the raising of forests, both bring wildlife into contact with people and their livestock. However, they also say that such efforts are severely underfunded, and by spending a mere US 260 billion over a decade, which actually represents only just 2% of the estimated 11.5 trillion costs of the COVID-19 pandemic to the world economy, a big difference could be made. The scientists call for better regulation of the wildlife trade, disease, surveillance, and control in wild and domestic animals, ending the wild meat trade in China and cutting deforestation by 40% in key places. There is a clear link between deforestation and the emergence of viruses. Tropical forest edges create a major launchpad for new viruses infecting humans. On top of this, the scientists argue that the cost would be virtually cancelled out anyway by another benefit, cutting the carbon dioxide emissions driving the climate crisis. This brings me to the issue that faces my own region critically in the immediate years ahead with climate change and the fate of 3 countries that have land masses and atolls barely higher than 3 to 4 meters above sea level. Let me introduce you to this cartoon. So meanwhile, on a low-lying South Pacific island sums up this cartoon rather starkly about climate change dilemmas facing the Asia-Pacific region from the perspective of microstates. Sitting atop a thatched roof valley, a Pacific village couple look out dismally across the ocean beyond a drowned coconut tree. I hear in Paris, over 200 countries have signed a 31-page document agreeing to reduce greenhouse gases by 2050, says the wife. Well, the husband replies, I'd like to read that. Does it come in a waterproof edition? Well, however, waterproof edition or not, the reality is that climate change is no longer a laughing matter. As Fiji Prime Minister Rinki Bainimarama once described it, he was expressing his frustration at some Western countries before the global COVID-19 pandemic swept the planet that remain in denial about the impact of climate change already happening, especially in the low-lying atoll microstates of the Pacific. While remaining vulnerable over climate change, Pacific nations are determined to lead by example to prevent devastation from COVID in their countries. None of the independent Pacific countries have a robust medical or epidemiological programs, yet as Nobel Peace Prize co-winner Elizabeth Holland points out, their leaders acted on the basis of science while other countries were still debating whether stay-at-home measures were required. She highlighted past crises. Pacific Island countries suffered tremendously from the diseases brought by early explorers, including smallpox, measles, syphilis and gonorrhea, and the memory still resonates. In recognition of their limited resources and the advantage of their remote location, Pacific countries have acted early to protect themselves and to close their borders, with considerable success to date. The alarm and fear accompanying COVID has galvanized action. One of the factors that has shocked the Pacific region and much of the world is how Western countries, especially the United States, with supposedly more advanced economies, had collapsed in the face of this relentless pandemic that has so far killed more than 790,000 people and infected 22.6 million, a quarter of those in the United States. What we have been witnessing is the demise of neoliberalism and rampant globalized growth that has underpinned economies for the past 4 decades. Neoliberalism has depleted state capacities in the name of super efficiency of the market, fostering deindustrialization through the globalization production and built fragile financial structures, secured by magical thinking and state guarantees, all in the name of short-term profitability, quote unquote, as Alfredo Saad-Filho put it, writing in Critical Sociology. It is no accident that the countries worst hit have often been those with the most advanced neoliberal economic systems that had neglected their public health systems, coupled with intransigent and inflexible leaders, such as the United States and embattled President Donald Trump. Millions of Americans have lost their jobs and thus their health insurance policies in a devastating economic and social tragedy. Think also Brazil and President Jair Bolsonaro, and the Philippines with President Rodrigo Duterte, both who are blindly following Trump. The absurdities were highlighted last week when a rattled Trump was driven to make a ludicrous remark, or rather a ludicrous attack on New Zealand three times in 1 week, declaring to a crowd in Pennsylvania on the last occasion that he did this, that it's, quote, all over for New Zealand, and labeling it a massive outbreak. His comments came the day after 5 new cases were identified in New Zealand, while new cases in the United States were 46,500. The total number of infections in the US are 5.6 million, more than the total New Zealand population of barely 5 million. Now, these comments were just so hilarious. I have to just show you a brief video clip. So just bear with me for a moment.
In fact, even New Zealand, you see what's going on in New Zealand. They beat it. It was like front page, they beat it because they wanted to show me something. The problem is big surge in New Zealand. So, you know, it's terrible. We don't want that.
We know by now to take everything that Donald Trump says with an enormous grain of salt. But coming from the leader of a country that had 42,000 new cases just yesterday, I think it's an absurd comparison.
Obviously, I don't think there's any comparison between New Zealand's current cluster and the tens of thousands of cases that are being seen daily in the United States. Obviously, every country is experiencing its own fight with COVID-19. It is a tricky virus, but not one where I would compare New Zealand's current status to the United States. New Zealand's 9 cases in a day does not compare to the United States' tens of thousands, and in fact does not compare to most countries in the real world. I'm not concerned about people misinterpreting our status.
The American people can work out that we have for a whole day what they have every 22 seconds of a day. That speaks for itself.
Hello, I'm not getting the slide presentation back here. So can I have some help from our technical team here?
Yes, David. In a minute, please. In a second. So while we are waiting for the technical matter.
Yes, well, I'll try and manage to carry on anyway. So just the visuals I have here. Here we are. Are you able to see this?
Yes,
Are
it
you
is
able to
there.
see what I'm showing at the moment?
Yes,
You
it's
can
there.
see that, but I can't get the full frame for that matter. So I'll just have to carry on like this, if that's okay. Anyway, there's a couple of slides here. I just want to show you that with, you know, Jacinda Ardern's approach in New Zealand is, you know, basically a cluster of 5 million people, nation and all in together. And this is a scene from the website that was created by the government to keep people informed. I can't get the next form, so I'm just carry on, have to do it manually. I'm not getting the automatic follow through. Anyway, this is another slide here. Just to carry on from this, in May, just last year, barely a half year earlier, Pacific leaders were quite blunt when telling the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres that climate change was the single greatest threat facing their vast section of the world, and they're running out of time to do enough to avoid catastrophe. While hosting Guterres in Fiji, the leaders of countries belonging to the Pacific Island Forum declared that they would like him to be a witness to the everyday reality of climate change in their huge oceanic backyard and to press for more urgent world action. And they appealed in a joint statement, "We will return to our island homes. Some of us will find our villages inundated by waves and our homes and public infrastructure wrecked by cyclones. Our coral reefs are dying, our food is disappearing, and we fear for the safety of our loved ones who are being injured and even killed by some of the most ferocious of cyclones and other extreme weather events ever witnessed in our region." The microstate leaders warned the world's major polluters, "Our today in the Pacific is undoubtedly your tomorrow." They added, "Sea level rise in Tuvalu is sea level rise in New York, though one might go under before the other." Was coming back to Fiji's Bainimarama, the first Pacific Island leader to have a role as a co-chair of the Global COP Climate Summit a couple of years ago, famously said, "We're all in the same canoe," an ongoing drua. He pleaded for countries to seriously cooperate together in tackling climate change. He also coined the term talanoa in the global climate context, a Fijian word meaning discussion and consultation. Bainimarama warned in a speech in Australia, one of the reluctant climate change nations, that if we don't work together, the planet will be in chaos. Earlier, he'd explained why Canberra ought to support 11 million Pacific Islanders across the Pacific. However, there have been some encouraging trends too. For example, Britain has shifted almost a third of its electricity generation away from fossil fuels in just 9 years. New Zealand has announced a zero carbon policy by 2050. And tiny Tokelau, a Pacific dependency of New Zealand comprising of just 3 islands and a population of mere 1,500 people, is already entirely energized by solar power. During his short Pacific tour last year, Antonio Guterres visited Tuvalu, which just has a population of 12,000, one of the central Pacific Island nations described by many as a disappearing country. The highest place in this country is only 4.6 meters above sea level. And the Secretary General described his visit as being at the extreme front line of the global climate emergency. He said the country was in danger of drowning, and lessons there were a warning of what's in store for us all unless the world treats climate change action with much greater urgency. Nearby Kiribati, a country of 32 scattered atolls and a population of 116,000, has become the poster nation for climate change, partly because of an impassioned advocacy of former President Inote Tong, who advocated a message of migration with dignity. with humanitarian visas rather than climate refugees, and who was inspiring in a documentary called A Notice Ark. However, his successor, in the picture at the bottom of the slide there, President Taneti Momo, has taken an opposite tack, arguing for adaptation and fighting climate change at home. According to Australian-based climate researchers Patrick Nunn and Rosalind Kumar, he is a president determined not to capitulate to Western narratives of vulnerability. They regard Momo's pro-China policy and against migration as not simply a difference of opinion with his predecessor, it's a culturally grounded expression of human dignity. They argue, for too long, the people of Kiribati have been pummeled and demeaned by global narratives that treat them as vulnerable. This view ignores the fact that proud peoples have lived on atolls in the equatorial Pacific for millennia, surviving countless disasters. In October 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned of the dire consequences of continued global warming, indicating the window of opportunity for action had narrowed to as little as 12 years. Scientists of the IPCC had been warning since 1988 that human activity, industrialization, and the world's dependence on fossil fuels have caused the warming of global temperatures that threaten life on Earth. In contrast, climate change deniers dismiss such dire premonitions as conspiracy. This crisis is a challenge for journalists and the media who need to counter misinformation and ignorance, not just as they need to do it with COVID-19. While there's about a reported 97% scientific consensus about the cause of climate change, still some media organizations, such as those owned by billionaire Rupert Murdoch in Australia and the United States, give disproportionate oxygen to the deniers. Even the Philippines has significant pockets of deniers in spite of the frequency of disasters, such as one of the world's worst typhoons, Haiyan, which in 2014 killed more than 6,300 people. This was far worse than the biggest ever cyclone in the South Pacific, Winston in Fiji in 2016, which left 44 people dead, but it did leave 350,000 people affected, which is almost 40% of the population. And the storms are hitting with increased frequency and greater savagery.
David, you have 5
Yes.
minutes to go.
Thank you. Just about wrapped up. So the policymakers summary in the IPCC report noted that pathways limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade would require rapid and far-reaching transitions in energy, land, urban and infrastructure, including transport and buildings and industrial systems. This system transitions are unprecedented in terms of scale. Yet global media coverage at the time was remarkably muted for such a development on the biggest story of the century, as James Varn, director of the Earth Journalism Network, has described it. Clearly, journalists are facing a fundamental reset themselves in the way we treat climate change and COVID-19. It is not just another round or beat, such as reporting the environment, health, or politics. It is a global existential threat, and we should be treating them as such. Some of these challenges can also be put to the test with the other story of the century, COVID-19. The Earth Journalism Network's parent organization, Internews, has developed a strategy for covering the global pandemic, but I will talk about this in more detail in my parallel session this afternoon. When the UN's Antonio Guterres was in New Zealand last year as part of his Pacific tour, he spoke at Auckland University of Technology, calling on the youth of the world to be as noisy as possible about climate change. He appealed to students to mobilize their societies, families, friends, and put governments under pressure, because it will be too late to wait until they were in power. Many youth are already doing just exactly that. Among Fiji's young activist policymakers is Jenny Diver, who says, climate change is a very real thing. We now know that it's happening and it's not debatable anymore. And in Europe, inspired by Swedish teenager Greta Thunberg, the youthful Extinction Rebellion advocates are campaigning vigorously and fearlessly. Journalists ought to take heed and take action through their journalism and reportage if they care for the planet, our health, and our children. There are no PPE wrapped or waterproof media guidelines for us to make a change. Terima kasih, thanks very much for listening to me. So I'll get rid of this.
Thank you so much, David, for your presentations and analysis on this very critical, greatest threat for our planet. I do agree with you that there is no joke for these climate change issues. And because we are already reeling from this climate change, but still, as you said, there are deniers. And ironically, those deniers are from the world leader, quote unquote. And also, yes, you're right, we should be very as noisy as possible to voice out this impact of climate change. All right, I think I should invite the participants to raise questions in the question and answer bullet, in the question and answer tab. Please also mention your name, your institutions, and also to whom you will address your question to. All right, moving forward, we will invite Dr. Sonny Mumbunan. He will do the presentations entitled Redefining Humanity and Nature Relations. Please, Dr. Sonny Mumbunan, the 20 minutes ahead is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Yulianto. Let me share my screen and let me know if it is working. Yeah, is it working?
Yes, it is. It's there. Okay. Very clear.
Thank you again. Thank you very much for inviting me to share some of the ideas about redefining human and nature relations in this incredible symposium. I sort of entitled my presentation as Redefining Humanity, so rather than just human, so it goes beyond human. It's about humanity and nature relations. Basically, what I'm going to address this morning is the entry points, and then a bit on safe operating space for humanity, and then as Professor David has pinpointed, the convergence of crisis. And I'm going to be a bit more positive and be brave to tackle this issue by coming up with two stories in which I'm also engaged in. One on peatland and policies in Indonesia, and then universal basic income for climate and nature, which is among the first of its kind in the world, and then reflections. So let me quote a piece by Robert Constanza in Ecological Application. So he's sort of to some degree some critical note on the classical and scientific discipline, which according to him tend to dissect, so put into smaller pieces their subject into smaller and isolated parts in an effort to reduce the problem to its essential elements. In order to allow the dissection of system components, it must be assumed that interaction and feedbacks between system elements are negligible, or that the links are essentially linear, so they can be added up to give the behavior of the whole. It derives some insight from von Bertalanffy about systems and how it works. So based on these, while advocating sustainability for Constanza, to achieve sustainability, the global community must deal with new types of problems threatening the future well-being and existence of Homo sapiens. So the existence of human becomes imperative here, And this what I also wanted to address. So the very consequence of such reading is that these problems need to be seen as fundamentally cross-scale, transcultural, and transdisciplinary, calling for both innovative research approaches and new social institutions. Let me move to nature or the environment and the space for humanity, somewhat of which has been also touched before by Professor Robbie. So I mentioned about, safe operating space for humanity. This basically coming from a group of researchers by Rockstrom of the research they published in Nature in 2009, showing different so-called Earth system, climate change, ocean acidification, of course, biodiversity loss, cycle of nitrogen or phosphorus, and so on and so forth. And you can see that the red ones suggest that we have sort of trespassing the green one, which is the safe operating space for humanity. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and nitrogen cycle are among the most, are already trespassing the space. Some are about to trespass, so it's a matter of time. Now, we see there are different processes that are at work at the moment, which are also relevant to be discussed for, the existence of human species. The safe operating space, or planetary boundaries is basically a boundaries that shows some threshold and dangerous level in the zone of uncertainty. So we are not really sure when or what extent, but at least the direction we can anticipate from these processes. Here are examples from carbon emission and land use change. Of course, there are processes that are slow. Some are faster, some also without, global threshold, but some are with threshold. At the planetary scale, there are like climate change, have a global scale threshold, while others like chemical pollutions or even biodiversity loss constitute slow processes without known global scale threshold. So we see that different processes with different degree of speed are at work here. This is one of the flagship report of the IPCC, so the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, the formal body of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that has published a report on 1.5 degree Celsius. There are two implications of reading these, is that we need to drastically reduce emissions. I mean, like half of the emissions to be able to stay under 1.5 degrees Celsius for climate stabilization. And we need to do it quite soon. Some are now speaking about, and the report suggests the range of it with 1 to 2 or 3 decades forthcoming. So when we discuss about relations between nature and humans, it's a discussion that is somewhat different than, say, with the one in the last 3 decades. Now there is a sense of scale, there is a urgency of time when we discuss about these relations. And to a large degree, it also relates to the very existence of human and humanity. Now let me move to convergence of crisis. We are in the middle of health crisis because of COVID-19. But we are at the same time also in the middle of other crises, and they may interact and sort of create a convergence of crises. Indonesia has -5, more than 5% economic growth, one of the lowest since the last recorded, the lowest one in 1999, and now we are in due process to recession. Now we have climate change, even with more impactful effects with a different degree of speed. You may also want to add biodiversity here. So we see convergence of crisis here, and Professor Robbie has mentioned about how COVID is also related to the way we interact with nature. Epidemiologists speak about the so-called pre-emergent state or stage in which encroachment into wildlife habitat and changing land use play pivotal roles before the emergence is localized, and because of our integrated economic system, travel and trade, then it becomes a pandemic as we are experiencing it at the moment. So COVID is not independent of what we are experiencing at the moment at the sort of the starting stage, but also later on it interacts with other processes and crises. In Indonesia, we are also speaking of so-called double health burden, potential for double health burdens because of forest fire, which is coming almost every year, despite of a discussion whether it is going to happen this year because of so-called solar minimum phenomena. But at least we need to anticipate, because even with a standalone forest fire, we had difficulties in responding to this. And COVID-19 has shown that we have a limited capacity to respond on this, and we may imagine how it may become when the two join and combine, in addition to, say, economic recession. Now, when it comes to the economic recession, I'd love to show a paper by our colleague in University of Oxford. They show how economic growth changed under 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius assumption. Based on this research, Indonesia will likely to experience a lower growth, both under 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius, around 2% of reduced growth compared to without additional warming. And now we are speaking of omnibus bill in Indonesia about creating jobs. And we imagine, because of interaction to climate change, so this is without interaction with COVID, even when the economy interacts with climate change, we may have around 2% lower economic growth. And if 1% suggests like 200 or 300,000 jobs, then you have 500,000 jobs probably missing because of climate change. So I think even the omnibus law or bill at the moment needs to consider climate change and its impact on job creation and economic growth. Now, so these are convergence of crises. Now, how to address such complexity of human and natural relation in the presence of converging crises? I would love to explore 2 stories. One on peatland policies, and the other one on universal basic income for climate and nature, or nature and climate. Now, peatland and policies, just to provide some context, peatland is very critical for Indonesia and the world because of its contribution to global emission. For Indonesia, it's almost half of the emission in 2010, based on the simulations and simulation by Bappenas, compared to other emission like energy or waste emissions. And it will go down, but it's still, in 2030, it will represent around 1/4 of the emission, so it's still non-negligible in that sense. Now, what is being considered at the moment is how to see, if we recall the quote from Robert Constanza about looking at the issues as a system, it may probably entail some linear relations among systems or subsystem or element of them, and then see whether they're balancing and enforcing feedback loops in the system. So this is what is actually being undertaken when the planning document of Indonesia is being designed and crafted, which lead to the midterm EPJMN, as we call it, so the midterm national development plan. It is interesting how to see different subsystems are considered here, from population, from ecosystem integrity, peatland emission, of course, job creation, health, financing, agriculture production, palm oil and timber, and so on and so forth, and how it is being seen as a system. And within that system, we consider, or the approach considers interventions for peat restoration conservation, which is interesting. What I think is quite interesting because it involves a deliberative process, which is something of interest to social scientists here. How they deliberate on what they consider interventions that are likely and probably suitable for the planning process. And the stakeholders are extended peer review community involving not only public institution, not only academia and scientists, but also indigenous communities, women groups, even private sectors. Now, the orange part here, in addition to the system approach, are basically the intervention that the stakeholders identified and it's modeled into the approach. It is not perfect, of course, but at least it attempts, it seeks to incorporate, as Professor Robbie mentioned about inclusion, about inclusiveness, how to involve broader stakeholders into, crafting development planning documents, one that is institutionalized and contextualized and inclusive. So that's sort of the first story that I would like to share this morning. Now, the second story is a bit on individual level. It's a basic income for nature and climate, and the very context here is in Tanah Papua, which the Indonesian Papua of two provinces, Papua province and West Papua province. Just to put things into perspective, so Papua is very significant to both climate and humanity. So just to compare and put this into perspective, Indonesia so-called nationally determined contribution, which is a contribution that Indonesia decide to contribute to the global emission reduction being orchestrated by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, already submitted. Indonesia aims to reduce 1.6 gigaton carbon dioxide, with and without international support. Now, if we look at the forest in Tanah Papua, now it's around 87% of forest cover compared to the whole area of the regions. If it reduced to say 80%, or say 80% to 70%, so a 10% forest cover reduction, it emits 3.5, potentially emit 3.5 gigaton. So more than Indonesia's whole entire emission reduction committed to the United Nations. So this is very critical. I'm speaking of 10% of forest cover reduction. Not 15, not 20, not even, let alone 50, it's 10%. And we can imagine how the impact of emission it may create from forest cover reduction. Now, at the moment, the region of Tanah Papua is under threat of land use change, mining, forest, concession, oil palm, as you can see in the picture here. The red one is mining. Oil palm is the yellow one. Sort of are encroaching some of the world most important and remaining tropical intact and savable forests. So this is should be something of concern to all of us. Now, how to bring human-nature relation in this sense? At the University of Indonesia, the Basic Income Labs, we are exploring the possibility of what we call forest carbon dividend, which is more or less like a universal basic income, aiming very specific to nature and climate. So under this concept, and it is an integrated concept, we develop how to mobilize resources sort of to pay for universal basic income as far as carbon dividend by valuing carbon stock below and above the ground in Tanah Papua. And from that valuation of carbon stock, we propose, a resource management using what we call forest carbon fund. It is more or less akin to how Alaska, the state of Alaska in the United States, organized the sort of the earnings from oil reserve in that state, and then from that earning we are exploring the possibility of sharing it to all residing populations in Tanah Papua as universal basic income. So with this concept of forest carbon,
Excuse me, you have 3 minutes to go.
Thank you. I'm about to come to the very last of my presentation. Thank you for reminding. So this is how we bring nature and climate into something that is tangible, something that we can, put into and institutionalize it into policies in Indonesia by linking different scale, global climate change and biodiversity loss and the very roles and significance of regions like Tanah Papua, and how human and nature relation are redefined through concept like forest carbon dividend and universal basic income for forest and climate. Now, some reflection on what I just said in this presentation. Human and nature relations are complex and now increasingly need to be addressed at scale, emission reduction, at the very scale that we need to address, and at speed because of the urgency of time to achieve sustainability and for the interest of human and humanity. Addressing such complexity arguably implies different approach, including in science, in studies, than business as usual ones as we now have. Now, the very question that I would like to extend to participants and those presenting, members of the faculties in the social science symposium, are social science fit for purpose for this? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sony. This is really reflective, and I think a lot of us are really thinking about how to fight climate change, and this is so urgent. We are free passing the so-called safe operating space for humanity, as you have shown us, and the speed and scale of climate change is really frightening. I think this is well, there is no space for denial. There is no space for those who think that climate is intangible. Yeah. So you have also extended your presentation to forest reductions and peatland issues in Indonesia, and also we agree that we are in convergence of crisis, and this makes this this effort to fight against climate change is really problematic in this time, especially in Indonesia, that people are still also think that climate change is, because it is not tangible still. All right, moving forward, we will invite Dr. Linda, who is presenting about climate change and human relations. Please, the 20 minutes ahead is yours, Dr. Linda.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Ita, Dr. Ita. It's so weird calling each other doctor, but yes, just call me Linda for any of you who are participating. I'm a lecturer in Fakultas Hukum Gajah Mada. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for Center for Southeast Asian Studies for inviting me as part of this prestigious discussion. I'm guessing there is like a specific purpose to put me like in the end of the previous two esteemed gentlemen's analysis, because I think I totally agree with their discussion. So let me share my slide with you. Okay. And slide. Okay. So Mbak Ita, I probably wouldn't need 20 minutes. I will probably need 13 to 15 minutes. I'll wrap up really fast so we have more time for discussions. Okay, so coming from my legal scholar background, this is the overview of the short talk that I will be giving today. The first one is the legal implication of COVID-19. And then I will try to compare COVID-19 and climate change as the two previous gentlemen already did, but I'm just going to wrap it up and try and put it in a ball that everybody could like understand. So the first issue that we'll talk about is the clash between rights of individual and government during COVID. The second one is the clash between data collection and privacy rights. The third one is difficulty in conducting court trials. And the fourth one is the inability to perform contractual obligation. Like, I will not go into too much detail because it's very technical legal term, but I think most of you would understand what I'm trying to say here. So these issues, I've been discussing them during these months, and it's published in the Straits Times newspaper and also in a magazine called The Impact Lawyer. So I will give the link to all of you in the chat or the Q&A or whatever bubbles that come out later, so you guys can totally read what we wrote on the specific issue. So this is just like an introduction, I would say. So the first issue is on the rights, the clashes of rights of individual versus government. Why do I say that? Okay, so when the COVID-19, the pandemic started, all countries in the world were like aghast, right? Everybody was shocked and didn't know what to do. Some countries decided to declare a state of emergency, which means like they stop whatever they want to do, they stop what they're doing, and then they stop everybody else from going to their country using the state of emergency law that they have. Other countries, like Indonesia, maybe Singapore also, opted to use existing legislation, plus they have additional regulation to back up the legislation. In whatever cases, in both cases, the exercise of government rights infringes upon individual rights, right? And this would lead to resentment from the people. At some point, I think these people who felt like, you know, their rights were infringed by the public health measures taken by governments would probably already have reasons to be not happy to begin with. So they weren't happy to begin with, and then COVID hit, the government asked them not to do specific things, and then they have, you know, grievances, for example, from financial crisis, from not being, having a good livelihoods, etc., etc. So, so there you go. You have infringes of individual rights versus government. The second issue that I will talk about, it happens in most countries, is the data collection issue. So data collections done by the governments infringes on privacy rights, right? The data collection that has been done by governments around the world is like most countries, like some countries. For example, Singapore, we're using the Trace Together app. In Indonesia, we're using the Peduli Lindungi app. And those are like Bluetooth app that customers have to download in order for the Bluetooth app to, be installed in your phone. And so they will know wherever you go, like what time, and if you meet other people with the same app that is on, you'll know the contact tracing for between individuals in the countries. Other countries would use just directly from the mobile network. So they didn't ask for consent. They just think if you have a mobile phone, we can track you, which they can actually, and it has been done. So this would cause a possibility of increased lawsuits on breach of privacy, right? We've seen this before several times. For example, in the census decision in the German Constitutional Court, in the EU Google litigation, which resulting in courts telling government to please ask for consent from the customers or the public before you're using all of this data for whatever reason, even if it's for public use, even if it's for public health. So that's the second issue. The third issue, I think this is mainly developing countries' problem. It's the difficulty in conducting court trials, right? Court trials in most countries were done conventionally, face-to-face in the courtroom, where the judge is there, the defendant is there, the lawyers are there. But during the pandemic, it's very hard to do, right? Because the possibility of contagion between, all the individuals that's supposed to be in one closed doors, one closed room. And so in most countries, courts opted to use digital platform, right? To conduct the trials online, right? Is it a problem? No, for, developed countries, for UK or European countries, maybe also in New Zealand, probably that's not a problem. But if, even in Brazil, they're already fully digitalized before COVID, so that's not a problem. But for developing world, that's a huge problem. In Indonesia, for example, we still have court proceeding. Some are digitalized. It's based on the preparedness of the court itself. If the court were located in cities and have good internet access, judges can opt for, okay, let's do this digitally, right? But if the courts are located in rural areas with no internet connection or very minimum internet connection, then, and then what? They still have to do it conventionally. And this will somehow prompt maybe the satisfactory of the parties. Maybe they think that it's, it's not fair for them to have it that way, or et cetera, et cetera. So the difficulty in conducting court trials would also lead to somehow legal problem during and after COVID. And the fourth one that I would like to highlight is the inability to perform contractual obligation. What does this mean? Okay, so during COVID, government decided to close places of business, right? Like now, some places of business are open. Now people can go. In some countries, there's no dining in still because of, the situation. But during COVID, period, and maybe still up until now, right? Some tenants think that it's unfair for them to pay bills, rent, while there were no customers. Imagine if you're a tenant in a mall and the mall was closed for 3 months and you still have to pay rent. That's not fair, right? But on the other hand, the landlords still need to pay the utility bills. They need to pay electricity, they need to pay water, they need to pay, everything else. So how are, these things going to be resolved? Some would go to lawsuits, right? Some would go to court and ask for solutions. like this is a very legal term, but in common law countries, maybe the doctrine of COVID-19 being a force majeure would require, physical impossibilities to pay, to ask for obligations being rewarded. But in civil law countries, like in France and Germany, Indonesia also, this force majeure might be used and might be able to be applied in those cases. Okay, so these are just the highlight of the possible legal implications that we will face during and after COVID. Because it's still going on, we don't really know what will happen, next. Everybody is like thinking, okay, it's going to end in the end of the year, but we never know. So the previous two speakers have highlighted how COVID-19 and climate change are, somehow COVID is, what does Prof. Robbie say? Dress rehearsal for climate change. And I agree about that, right? But I will not try to see the differences between them. I'm trying to see the commonalities between COVID and climate change. I think both are linked to rapid change. I think both are related to carbon taxes and stranded assets in terms of fossil fuels. And I think the role of the media in both issues are very important. Okay, so why both are linked to rapid change? In COVID time, in the pandemic time, many public health measures have been swiftly implemented to stop the spread of the virus, right? The government closes places of worship, mosques, churches, school, workplaces, malls, etc. And this, happens very rapidly, very sudden. Like people didn't even realize that they have to stay home all the time, right? And most of us didn't like that because we, it's our human nature that we don't like rapid change. Guess what? When climate change happens, it already happened in some countries. It happened to us too, but we couldn't process it, right? It happened also rapidly. Natural disasters led to displacement and deaths already happened. It happened very rapidly. And if it happened worldwide, the government probably wouldn't even have time to give announcements to us to not to go to school or not to go to work, right? Okay, so my second point is about stranded assets. So fossil fuel industry would be adversely affected if countries shift from fossil fuels to renewables because they understood climate change is real, right? If those big industrial fossil fuel based countries realize, okay, so it's more profitable to use renewable energy rather than fossil fuel energy, right? The fossil fuel industry would be stranded. We've seen this a little bit, right? During pandemic time, where the fossil fuels plummeted down because of, the traffic ban, because, nobody travels anywhere, nobody bought any oils. So that's the preview that we were talking about. The third issue is the role of the media. So both COVID and climate change are somehow very big in the media, right? But the way they presented it, the way they framed the issue is so different. When you hear about COVID, you hear that it's deadly, it's now, it's, you know, it's contagion, everybody needs to do this, right? But when you hear about climate change, you're hearing something that comes up in the near future, maybe a few years, maybe in a decade. So you don't hear the urgency that you heard for COVID when you hear about climate change impacts in the media. So I agree that COVID-19 pandemic is a dress rehearsal or a preview for climate change impacts. I think that echoing what the previous speakers already said, the illness and deaths of the COVID-19 is a mere fraction in comparison to the injuries, illness, deaths that result from climate change impacts, the extreme weather conditions, climate events, malnutrition, malaria, dengue, right? It's already happening, but it's so fast, and it's, you know, it's going also from small island countries into bigger island countries, into archipelagos, and then maybe even for landlocked countries in the end. It's already happening, but people need to wake up and understand that what we're facing right now, right, the COVID-19, it's just, you know, a small thing in comparison to what we will face if we don't act like we should to keep our environment healthy. Thank you so much. I'm waiting for the question and answer session. Thank you, Mbak Ita. I'm giving back the microphone to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Linda, for your comparative and critical analysis on COVID-19 and climate change crisis. Both are linked to rapid change, both related to carbon taxes, as you said, and stranded assets in terms of oil and natural resources. However, as you said, they are treated differently by maybe not only the media, but every one of us as well. Both are global scale. It is very deadly as well, but COVID-19 is portrayed as an urgent and deadly, and everyone, every country should be locked down, as the spread of the virus also follows the mobility of humans mobility. But this, the other way around, is happen to this climate change issues. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the question and answer sessions. You are invited to write down your questions in the question and answer tab. We have here already some questions. I would read as fairly as possible to each speakers. I think I will read the first questions to David. The questions are from Aninda from ISIS Singapore. She said, thank you, Professor Ravi, for the excellent talks. In climate change, deniers often utilize the objective power of capitalism by bringing people to be sympathetic to the business, thus will create a hegemony. Her question is, how do you think the power of communication should be optimally used by pro-environmental movements to break this hegemony? I think this question also relevant to the other two speakers, especially Dr. Linda later. You may respond later. David, maybe the time is yours to respond. Excuse me, I cannot hear you.
There we are, that's better. Sorry about that. Yes, no, I think that's a very interesting question, and it's something that's, that I've given a lot of thought to. But the problem is that globally, the sort of the media industry and so on is in decline in many respects, particularly the traditional news media, print media, and some of the main media organizations. I mean, in my own country, for example, there's been a massive layoff of staff over the last 5 to 10 years. And of course, it very much cripples media resources. So the mainstream media probably are very challenged in this area. And so NGOs, they don't have the resources that mainstream media organizations have, but increasingly they are becoming organizations that recruit investigative journalists. I think of, for example, Greenpeace. Greenpeace right over the globe has, sort of national entities that are part of Greenpeace, for example, Greenpeace Indonesia. And in New Zealand, one of the things they did a couple of years ago was employ one of the top investigative journalists off a mainstream television station. And his job is really to investigate a whole range of issues. And it became quite a controversial issue because the notion of journalists being objective, quote unquote, and being an observer of what is actually happening. Personally, I disagree with that view. I believe that journalists are part of a society. And so we have as much responsibility as everybody else. And we have a commitment as much as everybody else in a society. So it's not good enough to simply stand on the sidelines and say, yes, well, we're monitoring, but we're actually not part of it. Anyway, but this particular journalist encountered quite a discussion, quite a debate about, journalists actually taking a role in leading sort of points of view and getting more information across to the public. He was very clear about this. He said, well, look, as far as I'm concerned, it's doing what I've always been doing. I've been investigating, and I've been investigating in the public interest, and it's about empowering people to make proper decisions and so on. And if it means that it's an NGO organization that is prepared to sort of do that, and that's the way journalism's going to go. And I think increasingly that's going to be the case because, all over the world, many of the mainstream media organizations have lost credibility in a lot of respects. Even in the home of so-called independent journalism in the US, major media like New York Times, Washington Post, they've all been under enormous pressure about their credibility, especially when in a country like the US where there's been a major sort of denial of climate change and so on. So maybe, yes, increasingly so, NGOs around the world, particularly those who've got branches and connections in different countries, will be able to put more resources into this communication. I like that presentation. In fact, I must compliment both presenters, Sonny and Linda. I think that's really interesting. But I particularly heard Linda just now, and I thought the way that you presented the questions and challenges, I think it's really interesting. So I think yes, it's a challenge for. We can't just rely on mainstream media, quote unquote. I think also increasingly all over the world, you've got niche media, smaller media organizations. In France, for example, there's an organization called Mediapart, which was started off by one of the top investigative journalists on Le Monde. And he recruited journalists all over the country. And it's only a relatively small organization compared with the big media organizations, but it's very dedicated to investigation and providing good quality, reliable information that people can use and basically empowering our communities and societies.
Thank you very much, David. Dr. Linda, maybe you want to respond to this question?
Muted. Okay. Thank you, Rita. I think I was trying to type down my answer, but yes, I agree with Professor Robbie just said, and I also would like to add, I think what's going on here is in climate change impacts. It's so hard for people to understand because the framework is just too much. It's just too much to be called as a framework. Like people don't understand that they will lose their habitat, their place to live. People cannot absorb that in, probably in a lifetime until they do lose where they live. There are villages in East Java where it's already inundated. People cannot go back to where they lived because their house is underwater when sea level rise. But it's been ignored for too long, right? The basic factual framework of climate change impacts has been ignored for too long. The economic dislocations that we're facing, I think Masoni would know this better than I do, but the economic dislocation because of climate impacts has been too far, too much, so that it's hard to understand for individuals, for people, and for countries, because they think it's a natural phenomenon that it's happening like this, right? That's the basic denials of, how countries are responding to all of this. On the other hand, in COVID-19, because it's happening, you can see it happening right away. People get contagious, and then they went to the hospital and then they die. So they can tally the victims, which is easier for us to understand, right? And also they can calculate the loss. $1 billion are in stake, so they think that, okay, we can stop this. Well, on the other hand, climate change, like the amount of money is so big, they cannot even start to calculate it. So I think answering the question, how do us, not just media, but also academia and also students, people who can comprehend this issue, have to try to simplify the problem, make sure that what we tell other people is understandable by them. So I'm also an author in IPCC AR6, Assessment Report 6. And I kept on telling my fellow scientists, because they came from statistics, they came from, like really hard branches of chemistry and physics, things that I don't know. Like, we need to make IPCC report more understandable for common people. So when they read it, they understand, oh, okay, so this is what's going on. This is what's going to happen. I think all of us need to work on this together. It's because the issue is so hard to understand. It doesn't mean that the issue is not there, right? So it doesn't mean that we can just sweep it under the rug and try to ignore it. We need to make them understandable and relatable, so that, oh, okay, so this is what's going to happen. It's not just about the polar bear in the poles, but it's also about us who lives in islands. Indonesia will lose 150 islands in 2030, and that's like in 10 years. Given that we have 17,000 islands, but no need to be sombong lah, but but it's still dangerous, right? So and we have typhoons, and we have heat waves that we didn't have. That's not natural. If we can control what we do to the environment, if we can control our consumption of fossil fuel, we can control our emission, not burn the forest, maybe we can do better. Thank you, Mbak.
Thank you very much, Dr. Linda. David and Dr. Linda, do you think that Dr. Linda just mentioned that we need to make this problem of climate change understandable? We need to ground this threatening threat to the very language of the people. Do you think this is the problem? We think, maybe we know that we are already, the media already very noisy about this, but why people do not understand it? Is it a matter of communication? Is it a matter of language?
I think, sorry, you're speaking to me on this? Well, sorry.
Yes, to David and Dr. Linda.
All right, yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I think definitely this is a major issue is about language and about too often in media terms, it's couched in political, political sort of strategic, political decision making and so on, and not enough in looking at holistically for the impact on society and so on. And I think the challenge is very much to sort of be able to enable storytelling and such in a way that enables people to really connect and to relate to what happens. For example, just what Linda mentioned a moment ago about those islands that are disappearing or will be disappearing within a decade or so in Indonesia. And I think one of what we've approached the storytelling in the Pacific is a similar sort of way, that telling about how it actually affects people. Just as in with COVID-19, it's a slower process, but when they see the impact of families and communities, and in the case of Northern Islands of Papua New Guinea, for example, the entire small group of islands had to be evacuated over a period of about 5 years. And they were given land in Bougainville, one of the main islands in the north of Papua New Guinea. But there was a researcher who went to this remote island, Taku it's called, and she spent some months researching with the community, and she filmed the decisions that they were making. And as the salination of the atolls became worse and they couldn't produce their own crops and things like that, and the decision making was made. The young people, yes, they wanted to go. They wanted to go to Bougainville. The older people, but this is our ancestral homeland. This is everything. Our land is, we're identifying with our land and so on. So this researcher, she filmed that process, and I think that, and then she made a feature film from it. And I think it's that storytelling that is able to communicate with people and really get home to them. That it may appear to be a slow process, but in fact it is creeping up on us very, very fast.
Thank you, David. Can you just briefly comment on this, Dr. Linda?
Okay, Dr. Rita, I think I already said that it's a communication problem also, but I think your question is whether it's the only problem, right? No, I think it's also political will from the government,
Yeah.
and also not just the government, but also the business sector and, people who has money to invest. So I think Marsoni, as an economist, would probably have more data about this than I do. But when we talk to these people, to the investors, to, albeit banks, albeit, private sectors, who work on fossil fuels or palm oil industry, etc., we need to talk with them in money terms. Bahasa Indonesianya cuan nggak gitu. Kalau nggak cuan, if it's not, beneficial to them, they probably wouldn't care. Oh, climate change, who cares? But we can introduce, how renewable energy is more, beneficial than the traditional energy. We can say that it's cheaper, which it is. We can say that it's safer for the environment, of course, but it's cheaper and it gives them more money. Like we can see even in a fossil fuel focused country like the U.S., the Trump administration. I don't like them, and I'm not going to support them. Like my support means nothing. But anyway, even in this Trump administration, the renewable energy policy during the Trump administration is going up and up because the government there understood that it's. It gives them more money. It gives them more bargaining power towards, the future of the country. I think we need to also do that in developing countries. Like in Indonesia, if we buy a hybrid car, it costs so much more, which is illogical when you think about it. You need to give incentives more for the business and also for the people, so we can think more on how to benefit the environment, while also benefiting ourselves.
It is indeed really perplex situations. Thank you for your response. Now I will, I think, move to Dr. Sani. There are many questions addressed to you. I will first read from Mr. Dedi Krisyanto from Hong Kong. He questions, is there an alternative or way to get a source of life for the wider community, especially a country like Indonesia, without relying on attractive industries that do not depend on natural resources? That is the first question. You can also see that from the question and answer bullet. And the second one, the case of Papua you just presented. People who live with abundant natural resources, but the people still live in poverty. Investors and supported by state bureaucrats think that by preserving natural resources, the Papuan people will come out of the trap of poverty and underdevelopment. In fact, this is not the case. Alama is still being destroyed and plundered, but the people of Papua in general have not yet got their rights to be more prosperous and to advance their life. The question is there any guarantee that Papuan's nature and the cultural system of its people will not be damaged by the development of extractive industries in this land and that has come down from heaven? Prof. Sani, please, the time is yours. I cannot. Yes.
Thank you. So let me address from the second one, the Papua thing. Yeah, I think it's a challenge to all of us, and without presuming that the Papuan issue is easy to tackle, but I think there is some evidence that, as already mentioned, that the welfare of the people, communities are still lag behind, even compared to the fellow Indonesians. And different approaches, different ways have already been introduced and exposed to the people. But I think we need to explore further about. And again, this is not saying this is a silver bullet, but I think this is one among other possible way to focus on what the people of Papua are best. That is protecting their forests. So when we, for instance, explore the possibility of what we call forest carbon dividend, it considers that very capacity, and it also considers the threat of extractive industries, but also industrial plantation that Papua is having or is going to be having, and we need more of this kind of explorations, including linking it into the way development are being planned or being crafted in Papua. I think it's a question to all of us, why, given so much resources also, why the well-being of people are, maybe it's moving a bit, but it's not really to the extent that it is what people in Papua and communities there are aspiring to have. So that's more or less a comment on Papua. Now, on the alternatives, if we take the evidence from climate change research, I think our future is not so much, and I mentioned about safe operating space for humanity, and which implies a more sustainable kind of pathway to our future. I think extractive industries are not so much of our future. But when we turn, these challenges into Indonesian very context of policy makings and institutionalization, we see a different degree of the way that we need to address this. For instance, if it is coal minings, then I think it's easier to address, than, for instance, a palm oil plantation, both of which are critical to the driver of deforestation and climate change. But the way we approach these two are a bit different because of how they, sort of integrated and entrenched into the Indonesian economy. There has been an initiative, what is called Low Carbon Development Initiative by Indonesia that sort of try to address this issue. But again, it is at the planning level, and we know the reality, the realpolitik is or maybe something that is not necessarily, going into what have been addressed, what have been agreed on the planning level. I mean, we know it, and it's not a unique case of Indonesia. It happens also elsewhere. So the alternative way on extractive industries, I think we need to sort of thinking about the transition to a low carbon development or more sustainable economy, whatever you call it, green economy, by sort of, for instance, putting a metric on the way we see the economy. For instance, at the moment, I think it's one of the first of its kind in the world that the national planning has a metric on carbon emission and intensity in the outcome development indicator alongside, inequality, economic growth. So this is quite an achievement. This is something we need to appreciate, while at the same time see that it is necessary but not sufficient to address, the scale and the speed, the time urgency from what we have discussed coming from climate change and other issues. A more detailed and technical things about these, I think I can share, but I think the big idea is we have to acknowledge that the way we are now, the business as usual approach, is not working, but Linda say, benefiting ourselves, but it is going against our very interests. But then how we appreciate these is another issue. And I would like to add a bit discussion on the communication thing. I think it is a dead end when we say climate change to the public. It is, as mentioned, it's too extensive in terms of cognition, even to the educated one. And in Indonesia, you have professors and doctors who still believe in hoax. So that's even more challenging. But I think what we need to address is in their very own language. I'm doing a research in indigenous communities, trying to understand their capital, the natural capital stock. And I had a smallholder a survey, well, still the largest in Indonesia at the moment, asking not climate change, but asking, forest fire, drought, which in their so-called risk landscapes is among the most important one. So when a communication researcher or scientist or journalist come, Bapak, Ibu, menurut Bapak, Ibu, perubahan iklim bagaimana? I think they will not answer to that. They will not be in the position of being able to answer that. But if you ask flood, forest fire, haze, the choke, the breath, I mean, they're very good at it. So this is also a note that in my reflection, I think the communication issues need to be addressed. It is, again, fully second to that it is complex. But I think we may want to address or pose a correct, appropriate question to really better grasping the issue. I hope I addressed the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sani, for also commenting on these communication issues. I think this is also very critical for social scientists to ground this global problem to the very people who, as you said, that even professors in the academia do not understand about or are ignorant about climate change still.
Just to share the delicate of the issue, so I'm not really sort of criticizing our colleague professor, but that's as we know it, that's real. I forget to mention about what we did in Brantas watershed in East Java. we did cost and benefit analysis, discounting the future with interest rate. This is very technical. But the team at the University of Indonesia, we use it in Bahasa Jawa. I mean, in the deliberation process, it's working well. So this is the more cultural, putting more cultural sort of things into this. Just to add, sorry about it. Sorry for interrupting you.
Thank you, thank you.
I just add something. Sorry,
Yes,
Dr.
please,
Minto, can I just add something?
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, just to mention that I think specifically with this question about communication, in the sessions, the parallel sessions this afternoon, I'm actually addressing a particular project where we've addressed both COVID-19 and climate change as a project involving both the journalism school and journalists. So those who've asked the questions might like to share that this afternoon, because I think they might find it interesting. Thank you. It's the C1, I think it is, this afternoon.
Thank you for the information, David. Right, still another question to Dr. Sony from Ana Nurjana from Universitas Gadjah Mada. She said that I would like to address my question to Dr. Sani. This confidence crisis is somehow felt so real and terrifying. One of the aspects I'm interested in is about waste management during this pandemics. For example, in this pandemic era, some restaurants offered takeaway only, which included some disposable cutlery, which can add to the amount of waste annually. On the other hand, we are also facing many waste from health industry. From your perspectives, how's the world, or how is Indonesia and New Zealand, and this specifically, preparing to face this coming problem? And how is the social science taking part in solving this problem? Dr. Soni first.
Thank you. So I'm trying to unmute, but indeed I'm unmuted. Thank you. So yeah, waste will be, it has been an issue and will continue to be an important issue Indonesia and for Indonesia and worldwide. As to the question how we see the the possibility about waste issue because of COVID or during a pandemic, I think I don't really know any research on this, but I think we can anticipate that because of the change of the way we have it in terms of a food system, I think we may anticipate there are increase in waste. And to the question, how should we bring this into the broader discussion? I think we need to put it into the way we address it into both the individual decision, but also at the planning level and at different scale, national, provincial, and city or municipality level, alongside other also not less important issues of industrial waste, for instance. I need to address scale because in Indonesia, even sampah rumah tangga, household waste, it still become an issue at the national level, while in other part of the world, it can easily be tackled by a municipal government because of a clarity in terms of mandates and responsibilities. And during COVID-19, I think we need to, because there are a large chunk of our resources are being mobilized into addressing COVID-19 issues. And I think there have been some concern that the way we manage our waste are also affected by the reallocation of resources. So if you experience that usually, the waste management people working on collecting your garbage usually 4 times a week, and it's now once or 2 weeks. I think this is something that we need to understand because of the mobilization of resources. Yeah. But I fully agree. It's an issue that we need to address too.
Thank you. You said that even before COVID-19 pandemic, the waste issues in Indonesia, maybe not only in Indonesia, but also in Southeast Asia, is already alarming. Southeast Asian member countries are the top pollutant of plastic waste in the world oceans. And even more, this pandemic makes it even worse because the infectious waste is not well managed. We didn't think about that. This is really unforeseen, probably. What do you think, Prof. Sonny?
Yes, yes. I think it's exacerbated because of COVID, but even before, it's already an issue with infectious waste. But I like to share a research I did on so-called persistent organic pollutants, so polychlorinated biphenyls, the PCBs. It's not even something that we can easily appreciate because it goes into the food chains, you know, very, very toxic. It goes into the fish we eat, into the land, into the fish we eat. And I think we are struggling to address that even before COVID. This is very, very toxic and I think more dramatic compared to say the ways that we just discussed, again, without undermining it. But I think in part because just like climate change is you know, it's complex and we don't really or we cannot really appreciate, but it is very, very toxic and Indonesia needs to address. Indonesia has committed to the international convention on this, but I think it's still in progress. This is just an illustration of how one particular waste is not being addressed appropriately, and it will, you know, like converging into other waste issues and before and after and during pandemics, and then with other ways, with other issues, you know, like pollution interacting with climate change. There's a recent study saying that using a simulation of 100 years, then you have what they call the preventable death, you know, like 1.6 million of Jakartan population. I'm speaking of 1.6 million. And 1.1 in Bandung, 1.6 in Jakarta, you know, death, and that's a very, very significant kind of impact when climate change interact with pollution like PM 2.5 and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Do you think that as waste issue is man-made disaster, you know, that this is anthropogenic maritime disaster probably, it is more, it is easier to tackle in compared to climate change? Dr. Sonny?
Again, climate change is, so far as the science consensus, it's also climate, it's just a human induced, so it's yeah. And also the other issue that you raised and other participants and panelists have raised. But that's also lies the opportunity. If it is human-made, then the solutions, to the extent it is possible to be tackled, then it's also within our control. I mean, if we address this politically, economically, you know, including in the way we communicate things, I think there is a chance that it can also be tackled, right? If it is beyond our control, it's not human-induced, then it will be out of our possibilities.
Thank you very much. I will go now to Dr. Linda. There is a question for you. In fact, to all panelists, if we have time, you can also address this one. So this is from Mas Agung, Dr. Agung Wardana from Universitas Gadjah Mada. He said that environmental issues we are facing today, whether climate change, forest fires, transboundary pollutions, plastic waste, are regarded as the product of dominant paradigm in our relations to nature, which is the anthropocentrism, to be exact. Some argue that we need to reorient our relation to nature by embracing the paradigm of ecocentrism. However, ecocentrism is seemingly an abstract concept without a helpful tools of analysis. We want to learn from you your take on this. The next question, where we go from here? What we see nowadays to address this issue is really about extending the logic to the environmental problem, meaning that market is believed to be the savior for our environmental problems, including the forest carbon sink, environmental service, and etc. What do you think? Maybe we can go to Dr. Linda first, and then David, and then Dr. Sani.
Thank you, Dr. Rita, for the mentioning of the question. I tried to look at the Q&A, I couldn't find it. But anyway, it's true, like most of the problems that we're facing, including climate change, including waste problems, are anthropogenic. And so the question is whether we need to change our perception of, you know, us as people being the center of everything, and then change it to the environment as being the center of everything. It's good if we can. I suppose, you know, it would be very good if we can. But the civilization has been going on for centuries with, you know, the idea that humans are the center of the universe. So although if we want to go back to ancient civilization, then it will be different. It's when nature is the center of everything. So if, you know, if we want to study from history and how we can put emphasis on the importance of, you know, the environment as the center of how we live, of how we breathe, of how, you know, we do everything, then it would be excellent, actually. But the real problem is how to make people understand that environment is the basic subsistence of people. That's we didn't understand. Like I have students who ride their motorbike when they want to buy bakso 500 meters from their kos-kosan. So they can walk in 5 minutes, but instead they chose to take, you know, to put more burden on the environment and ride the motorbike. So I think it's also on the back of our mind, of our consciousness, on how, you know, we perceive the environment, on how we teach our kids, our children, how we teach our students to perceive that, you know, what we have now is priceless, right? Don't take longer shower when you can take 5-minute showers, you know. Don't ride motorbikes everywhere where you can walk, or ride a bike instead of motorbike. So like small things would amounted to larger things. Take our kids hiking instead of letting them play with, you know, gadgets and stuff like that. So it's day-to-day things when we talk about you know, the rights of the future generation. If the future generation didn't understand what they have is priceless, how are we going to educate them about, you know, putting environment as the center of everything? Because we are just so used to it, right? And we think it's the right thing, and that's why, oh, it's okay, right? Because somebody else would fix that. We can just throw trash here or waste here, somebody else will clean it. That's actually not okay. It's not true also. So I think that's the first question. The second question was about, can you please repeat the second question?
With the questions, what we see nowadays to address the issues is really about extending neoliberal, the logic to the environmental problem, meaning that the market is believed to be the savior for our environmental problems, including the carbon sink, environmental services, etc. What do you think?
Okay, so I think maybe Prof. Robbie and Prof. Sony would have like better idea on this, because I'm not a social scientist, I'm a legal scholar. But specifically, I think what is being used now by environmentalists, including myself, is trying to speak on the language that people understand. It's again the communication thing. When you speak to people, make sure that they understand what you're talking about, and make sure they will act on it. It's on mitigation and on adaptation and on, how you live with impacts and how to make sure that you survive. Whether it is neoliberalism, it might be cuan nggak cuan. If that's the only language that they understand, why not, right? If you're talking to politicians, make sure you say, we're talking about, people who voted for you. You get more votes if you are environmentally friendly. Your voters would still be alive, right? Or things like that. So I suppose in my line of thinking, I'm not saying that neoliberalism is good or bad, but I'm saying we're using all the tools that we have because the problem is already here. We're not going back and say, hey, we can change this by changing the theories. I don't think so. It's already here. Let's just face it and work with it with what we have. Thank you, Mbak.
Thank you very much. David, do you want to say something on this?
Sure. Well, actually, especially as part of this was very much a theme when I started off my presentation on about the failure of neoliberalism and so on. But clearly what is happening is we have a wake-up call, a global wake-up call. We have to make fundamental changes right across the world. Where, I just heard a news broadcast this morning relating to a case of a person who had contracted COVID-19 again 4 months after having it previously, and there's an indicator that even with a vaccine, this could very well likely be that vaccine won't give much protection for the various different strains of this coronavirus. So what I'm really saying here is that we already have, as I think that you might actually use this term, Sonny, that dress rehearsal with COVID-19 for what will eventually come with climate change and the decisions we have to make and so on. We actually face these fundamental decisions right now. I know during the lockdown period in my own city in Auckland in recent months, it was quite amazing to see how people changed for a period, I think it was about 8 weeks we really had. Where I live, we just live opposite a park, which normally is used. It's a very nice park with trees and things like, but it's normally used weekends for sport, and the whole place was taken over by families, and it's like the city was transformed. Empty streets, when the cars are gone for the whole period, and it was very obvious just how people changed their lives. And then the debate was, well, when lockdown came, do we go back to what we were doing before? Or do we do things quite differently in the future? And I think that's what the lesson was. And some people have grasped that lesson, and others want to go back to the same economic solutions, which were a failure. There's been a massive meeting in New Zealand, for example, between a number of different organizations that are trying to visualize and imagine what our societies can be in future, that is got a sort of more of a partnership with nature, if you like. And one of the things about the pandemic, and many scientists are actually sort of arguing that it's probably going to be the precursor of a number of pandemics, because ultimately it's about the transgression across wild forest areas and so on, and the live animals encroaching into back into human and livestock. That whole nexus, if you like. So we've got a warning now. We can actually change and approach our systems rather differently, and would be better prepared for the even major decisions that are going to face us over the next few years with climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Dr. Sonny?
Thank you. This is a very good question, and I think we need to address the, some of the ideological part of the discussion. But if we want to put it in a more sort of scholastic, in the epistemic approach to the issues, the colleague has questioned whether it is related or associated with a neoliberal kind of line or way of thinking. It can be, but I think it is only one possible explanation, because I've been following the discussion in the ecological economics society, and they are not only associating with neoliberal kind of approach, but also even within the so-called progressive one are also subject to criticisms because of the productivist nature of keep producing, beyond the boundaries that is possible in our relationship with nature. So yes, it can be criticized on neoliberal ground, but I think it applies also to other sort of epistemic persuasions. Even the term ecosystem services is being debated. If one looks at the IPBES, the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, there's being debated between the sort of those advocating ecosystem services and those advocating nature contribution to people, for instance. So these are healthy discussion and debate. And I think we need to sort of propose it. And in Indonesia, sorry to say, it's not really happening at the moment. We need to sort of facilitate this discussion because I think it will be benefiting all of us. If one asks the way I see it, or the way I see or respond to the question is, my concern is somewhat different than this. My concern is, if I want to have a sustainable Indonesia, which political party should I vote at the moment? Okay. So we can criticize very sharp about things, what we see. But when it comes to electoral process, which defines the regulation, which defines our relations to nature, our economy relation with nature, the way we see things, and institutionalization, of things related to nature, then this through the political process. Now, if I want to vote, which party should I vote? In Europe, you have a green parties organizing themselves, go into the policy process, and they can speak about carbon taxes, about stranded asset, about Green New Deal. I got a sense that we want to be Ocasio-Cortez here without wanting to go organize, join a political party, and use power to benefit nature and society. So you see the differences. Now the question is, which party should I vote at the moment? I don't know. And this is a simple question that I think I would like to ask our colleague here. I know there's some social sciences. What party are you going to vote? If there is no party of that kind, please build one. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Sani, for your response. Thank you so much for the very insightful and reflective presentation today. We regret that the time is running out. However, there are a few things that I want to wrap up. The first one is that this panel calls our attention that rethinking the social world in the 21st century also requires taking into account the relationship between humanity and the environment, or as our Mother Earth. We should be more aware that human is not only the center of the planet, but in fact an integral part of the planet. With the backdrop of the Digitalization, research must also reach beyond the Anthropocene and inclusively consider humanity within the global ecological awareness. or the ecology to tackle climate change, for example. I would quote Dr. Sonny Mumbuan's words, our future is not so much. In a nutshell, countries need to overhaul and reset their public health and economic system to ones based on international multilateral and collaborative system, and abandon on seriously curtail neoliberalism, a failed economic strategy. They need to approach climate change with as much urgency as the global coronavirus pandemic. The current pandemic is a precursor to further crisis unless the globe changes its ways to heal both people and the planet. Thank you very much for everyone. Thank you very much for the participants. Now I have to return back the scene to the MC. Mas Gilang, the time is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ita. Thank you very much, Professor Robbie, Dr. Sunny, and Dr. Linda for the fruitful and insightful discussion about the complexity. And so this is actually the end of the panel session. But before we close this panel session, I will inform you several things. First, we would ask all of you to have a group photo. Well, I'm not calling it a group photo. It's like a group screenshot. So we will ask you to turn your video on. So everyone, all the participants, all the panel speakers as well, to turn your video on. And then the committee, are you ready to take the screenshot? Yeah.
Are we taking the picture?
Okay. Yeah. The committee ready for the screenshot? So on the count on 3. So please turn your video on, everyone. All right, ready? Put your big smile. 1, 2, 3. Okay, again, one more time. 1, 2, 3. Great, thank you. All right, so yeah, this is something that we have to do for our virtual symposium, and that's the first one. So the second one, we are not going to use this room any longer for the parallel session. So all participants, you have to leave this Zoom room for this webinar room and join to another room, maximum at 10:55, so 5 to 11, by using the link that the committee has sent you through email. So click that link. So it's going to be different link with the link that you are using at the moment. And also, it's close. One more thing. So we are going to have the parallel session for the first one, a new map and opportunities of social sciences in the digital era. And then from the Department of Sociology, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Gadjah Mada. And then the next one, legal development in Indonesia, energy, infrastructure, and migrant workers, Faculty of Law, Universitas Gadjah Mada. And then the third one, integrated coastal zone management panel, Center for Integrated Coastal Zone Management, Universitas Diponegoro. And then Rethinking Population Studies in the Digital Age, Center for Population and Policy Studies, Universitas Gadjah Mada. The next one, contributions to digital societies, Digital Societies Research Group. And then the next one, COVID-19 outbreak and the media, journalism and communication issues in digital society, the case of Indonesia, Department of Communication Science, Faculty of Social and Political Science, Universitas Gadjah Mada. So, any more things? Okay, all right. So, yeah, so that's the announcement from us. And by finishing this panel session, I would also like to say goodbye to everyone, to all of you, to keynote speaker, to panel speakers, moderators, and all participants, because I finished my duty here as the Master of Ceremony, so I'm done here. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your patience and your cooperation. We will end this session right now, so you can join to the next one. Remember, click the link that the committee has already emailed to you. So it's going to be different link, different room.